So, Ralph, you've been speaking with Andy Matthews. He's been talking to you about writing comedy for television. Maybe you're in the airport, perhaps in Melbourne, waiting to fly back to the States, and you want to move the conversation along to your topic. How would you do that?
Well, talking with Andy, and he asked me not to call him by his first name. He was telling me about writing comedy, and I was drawing parallels to a hobby that I really care about, which is role-playing gaming, and how there's a lot of writing that goes into that. There's a lot of character stuff and situational things you have to take into account. And he was not interested. But you're here, so why don't we talk about that?
Sounds like a good idea. So let's start the show.
Well, he's got a new guest, time to put him to the test. So hey, what's the topic? We don't know, cause he never does research for this show. His name is Jason, he wants to talk to you about a topic you love or something you do. No two topics are ever the same. That might sound impressive, but they're all pretty lame. A conversation with
Hello, you're listening to A Conversation With. My name is Jason, and each week I'm joined by a guest and we have a conversation on a topic of their choice. And this week we are joined by Ralph Attanasia. You may know him from Cake Boss, and he's come to speak to us about, why don't you fill me in a little bit more on this topic, Ralph?
So what I want to talk about today is role-playing games.
So when you say role-playing games, what are we talking about exactly? Because I'm sort of familiar with the term. I hear it used almost in different sort of connotations. I have my idea of what a role-playing game is, but I'd like to know what you're specifically telling me about.
Sure. Well, there are lots of different kinds. The one most people would be most familiar with would be Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I think that's probably the one that even if people don't play it or don't really know anything about it, probably they know the name.
Yeah, that's the one that I think has the most universal exposure. But role-playing games are generally a game. It's like a collaborative storytelling effort where you and other people will get together and using a certain established set of rules, you'll all take on the persona of a character. And generally there's some kind of game master or storyteller who sets up the world or challenges that your characters will be facing. And you have to, by inhabiting that character and using whatever rules are available, make that story happen.
Yeah, so I guess my first question would be for you personally. Which role do you like? Do you like being that one who is running the story, or do you just prefer to be a character within making your decisions, not really having that overall kind of overarching view of the game, but just being a player within?
Ooh, I love to be able to just join a game that's going and play a character, but I am almost always the storyteller.
Oh, I don't know if I feel sorry for you or if that's on the one hand, surely that's a compliment on your ability as a storyteller, but if you want to be the guy that gets to have a go at actually being a character, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, I mean it's much easier to come in and play a character and like be given this sort of framework of this story to then jump in and play with. It's a lot more work when you're the storyteller or the game master or the dungeon master, depending on what you choose to call it. But you have to think about it as like putting together a one-man night of interactive theater for an entire group of people. So you have to write like the outline of the plot, and that'll be changed by the decisions the players make, so you have to be able to react to that. But you also have to work out, like if there are going to be any challenges or fights or anything like that, you have to know how the mechanics of the game you're playing work so that you can prepare for those things. Like, there's a lot of dice rolling in a lot of tabletop games.
Yeah, so I think we mentioned at the outset that like Dungeons and Dragons is probably the most famous one, and I think that possibly that turns certain people off because it might just be that I don't really like fantasy, I don't like fantasy, but I don't like that type of fantasy. I don't like Dungeons and Dragons. I like a space opera kind of thing.
Oh sure.
I think because Dungeons and Dragons is so well known for good and bad, let's say, that people might assume that, well, that's the only one. I don't really like that kind of thing. But I was just thinking when you were saying about this kind of, I think you used the phrase like an evening of fun or something like that. And I was like thrown back to kind of the old like murder mystery parties that people used to have.
That's absolutely a role-playing game.
Exactly. So I think they're the very same people that would have said, oh, that's really not my kind of thing. I don't, oh no, Dungeons and Dragons is not for me. But very much a murder mystery. Oh yeah, I love that. So I was wondering what kind of thing are you playing then? Are you one or the other? Or have you got like multiple different sort of role-playing games that you go for?
I mean, I until a few years ago, I wasn't too interested in Dungeons and Dragons because it seemed very rules dense and very slow paced. But I picked up the most recent edition of it and I started reading through it and I got really excited about it. A lot of the things I didn't like about it, they had sort of done away with. They'd streamlined a lot of things and it suddenly it seemed like a lot of fun and something that I could play and run really easily. So I've been doing a lot of that the last 2 years. I've also, for many years, been a live-action role player. It's often shortened to LARP.
Right, okay.
And that's something that definitely has a negative stigma attached to it. That is like, you are the big tape on the glasses nerd if you are going out LARPing.
So where would you do that?
So that often happens in, it depends. There are two main kinds of LARPs. There are combat LARPs and parlor LARPs.
Okay.
And so a combat LARP character, the players will have like padded weapons, like things made of foam and latex and duct tape and things like that, where you are going out and they're usually in like a campsite or a place like that. And you have soft, safe weapons and you go out and actually fight other people.
Okay, yeah. I can picture what you're saying. I've seen it kind of. I've not seen it live in person, but I've definitely seen it on TV shows and films and things like that. So I've got a good idea in my mind of what you're talking about.
And then a parlor LARP is the other kind where it's much more storytelling based, and so it would be in more of an indoor kind of location, generally like a bar or a hotel or some place that has a little bit of atmosphere. And everyone would have a character that they were playing that had certain abilities, but things like a fight or some kind of combat would be handled some other way than physically whomping on each other with foam weapons.
Right, okay.
And for me, that sort of takes a lot of the fun out of it.
That takes the fun away. You want to be, attempting to chop somebody up with a foam weapon.
Yeah, listen, if I'm going to get all dressed up as some kind of fantasy character or some other person, and there's the opportunity to play swords as well, then I would like to play swords as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm sure that the child within us all would. And anyone listening now going, no, not me, you're lying to yourself. so stop it. Oh, brilliant. So are you still doing that?
Yeah, I do. Not as much as I did when I was much younger, but I do it when I can. I'm actually going to one this weekend.
Oh, wow. Will people be able? Are there going to be a few pictures of that up on Twitter or Instagram or anything? Are we gonna see some?
Yeah, I'll definitely try to send one or two if I get any.
Brilliant. Well, you've got to be defending yourself at the same time, so I don't know how easy it will be to snap a picture.
Yeah, well, it's not combat all the time. The game I'm going to this weekend is called Sacred Grounds, which sounds like a religious coffee shop, but it's a kind of straightforward medieval fantasy LARP. It's very sword and sorcery. There's all different kinds of characters. I'm going with some friends of mine. One of them plays a satyr, like a goat man with a bow and arrow, and he's very wide-eyed and innocent. And I play a kind of conniving old old pirate who's in a constant social panic. He's always trying to become like a gentleman.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I tend to steer this good-natured little goat man astray all the time by involving him in my schemes for wealth so that I can buy my way into society.
Oh, brilliant. I mean, that's the thing. You've got such a deep backstory on your characters and everything. I think that's what I feel like that's maybe what people don't get about it or don't see, because they can only see the kind of surface level. And unless you sit down and talk to someone about it, or listen to a podcast where somebody else is talking to somebody about it, we finally found our purpose, you wouldn't kind of know that side of things. I think for me recently, I'm gonna give a little shout out to a previous guest, Dante, who he has a podcast called Play D&D. But what I found interesting about that is that he's actually taking like Marvel characters and just creating the story based around them. And so it's sort of a world you already know, maybe one you like. So, it's like he's just done a long campaign that was Guardians of the Galaxy. So he had all the different characters, different people playing the different characters, applying kind of the rules of D&D, but it wasn't like, for me, it wasn't the fantasy, dragons and that kind of thing. It was the more comic book side of things, something that I quite like, and I found that quite an interesting take on it, and quite enjoyable to sort of see how somebody can tell a story when you've got 4 or 5 other people that don't really care about your story because they're kind of creating their own as they go along. And
and it's not uncommon to hang the framework of your story on something that already exists that you're passionate about or knowledgeable about, and that's a really great starting point. I know that the character that I'm playing this weekend is largely based on Ben Kingsley's character in Box Trolls, which saw that movie, and I thought that was a really fun thing to explore. Someone who is kind of really sort of ruthless and not necessarily wholly evil, but definitely goes about a very selfish ends in whatever means are necessary. Like it's I like the idea of being a villain whose motivation is this constant social panic.
Yeah, I suppose the fact that you're not kind of limited to being a story told in an hour and a half movie, it gives you that ability to have a little bit more depth to your character. Motivations can become not just a little bit clearer to understand, but possibly influence things a lot more, because you can go anywhere, and then you've got other people who also have that same ability to sort of say, well, actually, I want to do this, and so you're playing off against them, kind of what they do, how they react. I mean, you might formulate a wonderful plan, and all you need is for one person to do something that just undermines everything you've just set up, and you've suddenly got.
And that's the best part.
Yeah, I think it's nice. It does let you. I think if you're surely you are a creative person, as anyone that would have seen you on Cake Boss knows. So it's just another kind of outlet for that creativity, I suppose.
Well, and that's some of the best stuff about this, is that like in both live action role playing and in tabletop games, it gives me the excuse to make a lot of stuff. Like in my tabletop games, I like to do a lot of stuff with miniatures, which, like when you're doing a battle or something in a tabletop game, to keep track of where you are, it can be as simple as having, a little sheet of graph paper with like a rough sketch of the area that those characters are in, and you can kind of keep track of where the enemies you're fighting are and where your characters are, because these fights can take a few minutes to resolve, so it helps to see what's going on. But people often do much more than that. They'll have like a big placemat with like a 1 by 1 inch grid and little miniatures that represent their characters and miniatures that represent the things that they're fighting. And people will go farther than that. They'll build terrain. They'll build, like little miniature buildings or whatever is around, so that when everybody is kind of playing with this battle that's going on in front of you, it brings you a little more into it, because you're not just looking at graph paper. You can kind of see what's happening.
So this is the first time we've actually spoke, Ralph. So I'm going to say I don't know you that well. but I get the feeling that you are more of the latter than the former. I just want to say I don't see you just sitting there with a piece of graph paper, but I feel that you are building some elaborate creation.
Well, that's just it. It really, especially working as I do, I sculpt for a living. So, easily 40 hours a week, often more, I'm sculpting at work. And when I come home, it's very hard to drum up the enthusiasm to work on some kind of physical project, which is a bummer because that's what I love to do. I love to sculpt. I love to make things. And when it's your job, it can take some of the fun out of it as a leisure activity. So when you have something that gives you a specific goal, something you need to make something for, but that isn't, life or death or job important, that's really nice. And I get that a lot from these various games.
Do you find that you hold yourself to kind of the same standards when you're at home doing this thing for yourself that you do when you're at work? Because obviously when you're working, and if anybody has no idea what we're talking about, just go on YouTube and just type in Ralph Cake Boss and see some of the insane things you've had to make. So
yeah, it's a bit pretentious of me to just assume that people listening know who I am and what I do. I'm the head of the sculpture department at a bakery that makes specialty cakes. And so I do a lot of sculpture with chocolate and edible materials, and they shoot the TV show Cake Boss there and a bunch of other shows as well. We actually have a new show that's on right now.
Yeah, I saw you put a tweet out about that. So you were judging something.
That's right. Bake It Like Buddy, the show's called. That was a lot of fun to work on. We had a lot of talented people come through there.
Yeah. So, but
we're not talking
about that. But so welcome back, everybody who paused and went on YouTube. And yeah, that alligator that you made, impressive, right? Really big.
That was a blast.
I think that's this. Did you make this? Because I haven't done any. If you've listened to the theme tune, you'll know I haven't done any research, but I'm kind of remembering some of the ones I saw with my wife when we were living in Italy. Did you make a flushing toilet cake?
We did. That was when I first started working at the bakery, too. That was a long time ago.
That is probably the one that for some reason just sticks in my mind. I don't know why.
Well, because it should never have been food.
Yeah, that's exactly why then. I just worked out why that sticks in my mind. Okay, brilliant. Case closed. Excellent. But going back to the question I asked...
it's entirely the wrong end.
It definitely is, yeah. You don't really want to think about food there, do you? That's it's probably the one room you really want to keep food out of, if you ask me. But anyway, going back to why I started talking about this, and especially if you did pause and go and watch, because the problem is you'll go on a deep dive. I'll watch one video just to see what they're talking about. Welcome half an hour later after you've just quickly checked out the next 5 that were in the queue. Obviously, the people that are requesting these cakes and are paying what I assume is quite a bit of money for these cakes demand a certain degree of perfection from their cakes, and I'm sure your boss does as well.
Yeah, we have something of a reputation to live up to.
So my kind of question is, because you said you're doing something at home, it's not life or death, so if you don't hit that deadline, it's kind of not the end of the world. But do you feel a little bit like, it kind of is, like, maybe you finished this thing, it's ready, you're using it.
I know what you're talking about.
You're just looking at it and seeing all the imperfections or all the things you kind of wish you'd finished.
It's a different style of work, because at the bakery you have to, especially working with food as I do, you have this combination of it has to look perfect, but you also don't have any time to do it. Because the work that you're doing has a certain shelf life. It can only be around for so long before it has to get boxed up and sent out, because it's food. So you have to strike this balance, and it leads to getting very good at doing certain things quickly. And so you have to work as fast as you can, and you have to know where you can spend your time and where you have to streamline your process. But when I'm working at home, I can get very indulgent.
So do you? Is that kind of how you keep the? You mentioned before when you do it for a job, it can be difficult to kind of have the motivation to do the same thing as a hobby or for fun, because you're like, well, I've been doing this all day. But is it the fact that you can sort of say, yeah, but I've been doing it all day in this kind of mode where I'm having to work as fast as I can and cut
right, and I'm not in charge of what it is that I'm making and any number of other things.
Yeah. So is that where you find the joy comes then at home, being able to say, you know what, I'm making this. It's my design. It's what I want. Making it in the way I want, and I'll take the time I need to make it so it sort of fits exactly what I have in mind.
Oh yeah, that's definitely the case. That and I can branch out into a lot more different disciplines as well. I've in the last couple of years, I got really into leatherworking for a little while. I was making hats. I got into crafting like sort of props and costume pieces out of foam, which I always sort of dip back into because it's useful for LARPing. I've really been playing around with a lot of different disciplines, and most of them are usually because they have some application for one of these various role-playing games.
But of course you tell everyone at work, no, it's just in case I need to know how to do this for a cake. But
no, they know who and what I am.
Yeah. I think I saw your interview, or is it your interview, like when you first turned up at the shop, and the reaction to you was a bit not the friendliest.
Yeah, I was not what they were expecting.
But look what they got. Wow, how'd that work out for them? You see, never judge a book by its cover, isn't that what they say?
Well, I mean, I feel like in that instance they probably could have. I'm.
That's true.
It's not like I'm different from how I present myself.
No, I suppose actually, I mean, to a degree, I feel like that is beneficial, isn't it? Because the things you can create, and the fact that you're so, I mean, it's true that maybe there isn't a direct, you're saying you've learned all these other skills, all these other kind of crafting tools and abilities. And while maybe not all of them will have a direct application in the workplace, you are constantly honing your craft, which is beneficial also for them, I suppose, because most of us, when we get back from work, we don't want to do anything that resembles our work at all. We kind of want to be able to just sort of close the door and be like, right, that's done now. And, those who actually have a passion for something and hone their skills surely are few and far between, I would imagine.
Yeah, but everyone has to strike that balance for themselves, and it's not everyone, like, that doesn't even really apply to a lot of people. Like, there aren't a ton of accountants who are leaving work and then have some kind of leisure accountancy that they can do for fun. It's
well, yeah, I think there's a much harder divide between work and everything else. Do you know what I mean? Like, for most people, it's kind of like work, that's this thing, like you say, like an accountant. Work, that's me, spreadsheets, numbers, calculations. But at home, apart from kind of doing the odd bit of maths for things that I want to do, I'm not kind of doing my accounting at home. Whereas, yeah, I imagine it's very few jobs that have such a kind of a crossover to something, I do this for work, but also there's an element of that I really enjoy, that I use in my daily life for entertainment or for recreation. Yeah.
But no, correct me if I'm wrong. You used to be an English teacher, right?
Yes, that was what spurred on the podcast in the first place.
But I mean, you certainly still in your leisure time are reading and writing things, surely.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I used to have to really try and switch it off, the English teaching side, because I lived abroad for a long time. So nearly everyone I spoke to, English was their second or third language. It meant I didn't want to be with my friends and constantly correcting them or helping them to kind of. It's not nice to have a conversation and every other word be going, that's not what you meant, or that's not quite correct. So I kind of had the rule that as long as I understood what somebody was saying, I wouldn't correct them. And I would only step in if they were saying something that was going to, if I didn't tell you now, in the future, you'll say this to somebody else and it will kind of cause embarrassment because it's really not what you mean at all. It's got a complete different meaning kind of thing. But I get what you mean. Yeah, of course, I still read. I've actually gotten a little bit more into writing because I have another podcast that's a game show. And so I have to kind of write the questions, and one of the questions is always a story. So I have to kind of, it's just, so if anyone is listening to this who hasn't listened to my other show, which is much newer, might be the case. But basically, two people come on, they answer questions about a complete stranger. And the idea is, does knowing his favorite film help you identify his, favorite band, or knowing the favorite actor? Will that give you any hint towards their favorite food? It's sort of trying to almost get a profile on a person just answering these questions. And then there's always a story from their past. So people have filled out a questionnaire. They've given me a kind of a funny story, and then I need to write an alternative. So I'm trying to kind of copy somehow the style this person has put across, or the story they've given me, and then just change it enough, or have a kind of, it diverts at one place that can be realistic enough but still strange enough that it's not obvious that it's maybe the wrong one, but it's not so bizarre that it definitely can't be that one. Yeah.
So see, it sounds like with the prep that you put into this, you'd probably be a great game master or storyteller for a tabletop role-playing game.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe that's my... No, I've already got 2 podcasts and a family and a job, so it's not.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's not happening.
But the same kind of preparation goes into something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think I really like that element of it, the storytelling side, and from like the listening to Dante's one and hearing that side of thing, I think the story element is by far the most interesting part. And then the battles and things like that they're doing, to me, it's very secondary. I'd be happy just to listen to these people go on an adventure and make decisions, and who knows what's going to happen, and they kind of never get into a fight in the whole thing, because I just find the story itself is so, that's really what kind of draws me in.
Well, it's rarely the more rules-based battles that make the stories that people remember from any gaming campaign. It's always the interactions between the characters and the adventures that they get into that are the memorable thing. Those battles and those rules and stuff are just there to facilitate figuring out the outcome of these conflicts, which maybe don't work as well narratively or are a little harder to abstract. I mean, a lot of these tabletop games have their roots in like wargaming simulations.
Yeah, I'm sure I've heard that somewhere, possibly on another podcast. It might even be maybe Rory's podcast. I think he spoke about where so I don't know if it was Dungeons and Dragons or something, but it was kind of the history of tabletop games, definitely. I'm sure I've heard, if it wasn't there, sorry whoever told me this, but I'm sure I'd heard that it was somebody who liked these kind of military sort of campaign tabletop games, and from there split off and started their own thing.
That was definitely Gary Gygax, who created Dungeons and Dragons. He did that with D&D. He was really into these military kind of games, and then wanted to focus more on the character side of it, like if you could be one of the soldiers involved in it, and that was sort of where it spun out from.
Yeah, I think my kind of first real encounter with that kind of idea is probably more through video games, and thinking some of like I remember some of the first sort of where you got to really make decisions, and the decisions influence how the game played. I remember sort of the first time that came up, I was like, wow, this is so different from anything else. I get to decide I think back to the old Star Wars game that came out on, I want to say it was like the original Xbox, something like that. Knights of the Republic, I think. Knights of the Old Republic.
Oh, yeah.
The old one there, and it was like, oh, you talk to the people, you make your decisions, and you can be kind to them or you can be mean, and depending on how you treat them, will, down the line, you'll realize that perhaps you should have been a bit nicer. And
yeah, but where those, but all of that stuff in those games comes from D&D.
Yeah, but I think for me, not being aware of that, not really knowing what D&D was, this was my first kind of, okay, that's what this is. All right, you can make that. And then it's only after the fact really actually hearing what. I don't even know if it's just because of where I grew up. There was no, I'm not really aware of anyone like at my school or anything like that who played any kind of role-playing game. Maybe they did. They just didn't tell me. But
yeah, I wasn't even really aware of a lot of this stuff until I was well into my late teens.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's also, is it a more American thing or not? Is that just...
Well, I don't know. I know that it's very different in the United States than it is in a lot of Europe. Like, there are some games, I know a friend of mine who's a fantastically talented artist. She works in the video game industry, but she's also one of the finest role players I've known. She's going to a big game in Eastern Europe somewhere. I don't remember now. But a lot of the games that go on out there will be like these week-long affairs where it's two camps of armies will be waiting and waging, like they're preparing for one giant war, and it'll be hundreds or sometimes 1,000 people on either side. And there will be, days of lead up to this. There'll be like minor skirmishes and information gathering missions and stuff. And then finally it'll just be two armies meeting on either side of a field that will then rush into each other and fight.
Would you be up for something like that?
Oh, are you kidding me? That sounds like the best.
You're not going to organize your own one? Get a few thousand of your friends to turn up?
Yeah, I'd have to exclude a lot of people, because if I have to whittle it down to just a few thousand of my friends. Yeah, no.
Well, you're going to have to offend somebody.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? It's just so... unless you're kind of in those circles, you just don't hear about any of this, do you?
It's one of those things that I think there's a bigger fan base for, like a bigger potential fan base for than there is currently. It's something like paintball, say, where it could be one of those things that if there was a business that was marketing it towards casual players, people who could come in a group of 6 or 10 or 12 or whatever, say for a bachelor party or from an office for a team building exercise or whatever, and they have everything there for them. You've got your armor and your costumes and your weapons. It's like, all right, you're all here are your characters, here are your stats, you go out there, we take care of everything else. I think if there was a lower commitment version of it, both in terms of preparation and time, then it could have, I think, a bigger following.
Yeah,
but it's very niche right now.
I think there's kind of clear evidence of that when you look at the kind of the success of things like escape rooms. That was something that kind of got big all of a sudden, seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, but people that you really wouldn't expect to be into that kind of thing were sort of saying, oh, we did this at the weekend, and you're like, really? Because that's not, I don't see you kind of as the role-playing type, and they probably don't even realize that that's really what they're doing, because you're not really locked in a room. You are, but I'm pretty sure you can knock on a door and someone will open it for you if you're in trouble. But or going back to what we said before, the kind of the murder mystery parties that people used to have. So there have been, and that's again you'd buy a pack, wouldn't you? It was all set up. You just bought a box, and in the box it said, these are the invite 10 people, these are the 10 characters that you need to come, and you'd give everyone their little character sheet. And it's only that to the other side of things, you are having the freedom, we could say, to create everything from the ground up. that people just are like, well, I don't have time for that, or I don't know how to do that, or that doesn't sound appealing to me. But I think if you give anyone an opportunity to be somebody else for an afternoon, go and be somebody else, do something else, they'll probably take it, won't they?
Yeah, and you know, it's a social activity as well. You wind up running into people you wouldn't have met otherwise. I mean, my girlfriend, who has just recently moved in with me, is someone that I met through this community.
Oh wow! So is that the LARPing one then as well, or is that
Yes.
just the tabletop? So she'll go out with you, dressed up, ready for battle.
We actually haven't done it together very much.
Oh, there you go. Next date night, you know what you've got to...
Yeah, she was supposed to come this weekend, but it wound up not working out.
So if she goes with you, would you be on the same team or opposing sides?
Knowing our relationship, almost certainly opposing sides.
You know, he said, we're always together. You live with me now. It's the only time I get to...
We're very combative. I tend to like to play either dim-witted or amoral characters because that's a lot of fun for me.
I thought you'd always be the good guy. I thought you'd just be, you know, the white knight.
I went through a steady couple of years of playing like lawful, honorable heroes because these games are generally geared towards the assumption that your character is going to be the good guy. But so a lot of the people who run the games are sending out villains and antagonists, and, you know, bad guys for you to deal with. So I realized that as much as I love playing, you know, like bootlicks and schemers and bullies and all kinds of weird, you know, less good characters, there was a lot more fun to be had with a lot less effort if you played a good guy because the game wanted you to be one. And there was a lot of immediate reward for doing that. But I've sort of circled back around to liking to play someone with a more selfish or shady motive. And also, the trick there is doing it without giving other players a bad time.
Yeah. You don't want to be the guy that when you turn up, everyone's like, oh, no, not him.
Yeah, I like to, if I'm going to be a thorn in everyone's side, I want to do it in a way that's fun.
I think it is... Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because I think it was a previous episode I saw someone saying that generally the villain or the bad guy, they, you know, in films quite often they are the more interesting character very often, aren't they? And they quite often get to do the more interesting things. And you know, we're all supposed to get behind the good guy and be rooting for him, but quite often they can be very kind of, yeah, just as you say, they're just you know, the white knight, they're doing what they should be doing, and it's sort of...
sure. I mean, who looks like they're having more fun, Luke Skywalker or Emperor Palpatine?
Well, he cackles like he's having fun, so I assume
he's having a blast.
Have you ever done a Star Wars sort of themed role-playing game?
I have a friend who runs a lot of LARPs. He also publishes with his wife and some other people. They publish a bunch of tabletop role-playing games. But as a fundraiser for the Humane Society in my neighborhood over in Jersey City, where I got my cat, who is looking at me right now, they ran a Star Wars, a loosely, non-copyright infringingly Star Wars themed escape room kind of parlor LARP for charity. You know, to raise money for the animal shelter. And so that was a lot of fun. I got to play like a masked bounty hunter who was, you know, I was sort of on staff for this. So like when people came in, I got to like give them little missions to go on and pay them to do nefarious deeds and stuff. And that was neat.
So you're, again, going back to like the video game trips, you were the guy who just stands by that door of that town all day, every day for the traveller who's walking past to be given a mission.
I was one of the NPCs.
Because you always wonder, you're like, does that guy ever go home? He's just there all the time. And now we know it's true. So, brilliant.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of like coming up to people being like, look, I can't be seen to be involved directly, but there's a little bit of money in it for you if you want to help me out with something.
Generally, are they... I mean, I imagine that they've gone there to support a cause and they're probably quite up for it, but Do people, is it one of those things where they're maybe initially a little bit kind of, oh, I'm still John from down the road, but I'm just dressed differently? Or do they immediately jump into, yes, I will do this because I'm here and I'm, on an adventure?
It's different for everybody, but generally, if you engage someone as their character, they fall into it a lot more naturally. Like if you see someone walking up to you and they've got a gun on their hip and they're wearing a Rebel Alliance insignia or whatever, you're like, you've immediately got some idea of who they are, and so you start talking to them like they're that person and asking them questions about the world they're supposed to be in, and they'll generally fall into it with you.
Yeah, right. So this leads to a sort of a question, a discussion I was having with somebody the other day, off pod, so content is lost, but it's the worst kind of conversation. Yeah, I've got to start recording everything. We were talking about role-playing games, actually, and because he just asked me if I'd ever done them. But he was speaking about a very specific type he'd just heard on a podcast, which I cannot remember, but it kind of had almost like save points on it, and it was like, and then, if it goes wrong, you have to reset from this spot or something, which seemed a bit odd to me. But we were just discussing it and kind of talking about the people we know in common and like, how would you get them on board to do this kind of thing? So if you wanted to ease somebody into this, sort of just have a fun evening with a kind of role-playing game, what would you suggest is the best way to sort of get somebody just to give it a go, just try something a little bit different?
I mean, there are some more simple tabletop role-playing games that are easy to run and could only last, an hour or two. My friends who I was telling you about, who did the Star Wars game, they have a game that I got to do some illustrations for the rule book recently. It's called Rememorex, which is a 1980s suburban horror-themed game. So you play as like preteens or teenagers, and it's sort of in the vein of like It or Gremlins.
Right, okay.
But the rules are very light. Like the entire rule book is only maybe a centimeter thick. Like it's a short book, and a lot of that is like illustrations and sort of background and flavor text. But the rules themselves are that each character has like 3 attributes, and so anything you're trying to do, you draw on whichever one of those you think suits it best. So you can set up a character in a few minutes, and then you just have one person, and you make it casual. You get snacks, you get a couple of beers, everybody hangs out, you play some music to sort of get people into the right atmosphere, and you just go.
Yeah, I think, so I'm also wondering, because you're saying like your friends made this one, how easy is it to kind of make your own thing? If you've got maybe friends that they really like this, or they really like this show, or they're really into this kind of, this type of TV program or film, I think I could make something similar that they'd enjoy. Is that an insane amount of work? Or if you're doing it kind of a simple stripped down version, it wouldn't be so difficult to kind of steal a little bit of the rules from somewhere else and create your own thing that's quite unique?
Definitely easy. There are so many different games and systems out there. It's definitely easier to use an existing set of rules. I'm very bad with the rules side of this stuff, so it's hard for me to wrap my head around the idea of writing a whole new set of rules.
Yeah, I suppose it's better just to take the rules from one and say, okay, but instead of your character being, X, Y, and Z, we'll have characters that are this, that, and the other, and we'll just apply X, Y, and Z to them. And then you just follow it, and, and instead of going through this forest, you're going through this forest planet, and instead of going into that
simple.
All right. Well,
what's a really good? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to anyway. There's a game that's called The Resistance, I think, it's just a game of figuring out. It's more like a regular board game than a role playing game, but it has a role play aspect to it, where everybody has one person in each round is a member of a resistance that's fighting against some government or whatever, some corrupt autocracy. And your job is to figure out who is in the resistance and who isn't. And it's rounds that last just a few minutes each, but that's like the first, littlest baby step level into this world.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sort of smuggle it in, isn't it? You just got
Yeah.
people like, do you want to play a board game? Yeah, what do you want to play? You've got the usuals, Pictionary, Taboo, or, oh, hold on, what's this one? And then you sort of...
Yeah, this one's a bit fun. You give it a shot.
Yeah, I think that might work. Ralph, it's normally at this point, or 20 minutes ago, that I would hand over to you to see if you had any questions for me about your topic that I guess we're just going to put as role-playing games at this point. What do you want to ask me about your topic?
So I guess if someone offered you to the opportunity, like, hey, we're going to one of these games, this was a friend of yours, and they asked you to come along, what would be the hurdles for you? Like, what would be the things that would hold you back from going?
Good question. Apart from my family,
well, assume you had a weekend free to go off to the woods somewhere and do one of these things.
Okay, what would I don't know if that. I suppose it would probably depend a lot on what the theme was, of it. Kind of that'd probably be. I think if it's something that I like, I'd be up for it. I'd be like, yep, let's go. I'm quite. I don't want to say I'm quite reserved, but I find I'd probably convince myself like, oh, I wouldn't do it. I'd be embarrassed, and then I absolutely do it. and as soon as I don't think anybody's looking, I'm like all in, and then once they turn around and they see me, it's too late. I'm already all in.
I've heard people say things like that before too, and it's quite hard to stay embarrassed when everybody else looks as foolish as you do.
Yeah, I think I'd want. I feel like with that kind of thing though, I'd need to commit. Like if I have to go in costume, it better be a brilliant costume. Like I can't do this halfway. You know, I need to be. I feel with all of these things, if you're going to do it, just do it. Don't kind of partially go in. So yeah,
it's a lot more fun when you do too. Like when you've got, you know, if you show up somewhere and you're just sort of in like sweatpants and with like a tabard thrown over it and a belt around it, you feel a bit dim. But if you can show up and you feel like you're really inhabiting whatever character you're playing, it helps a lot.
Yeah, I think if it was just like something fairly simple, like it was just sort of saying, oh, it's just medieval, like, you know, I mean, we'll just do like a medieval theme. We'll just jump back in time a few hundred years, and that's it. Kind of. So everybody's like a knight or a squire or a peasant or you know, it's just as it would have been. Pick your character, make your backstory, and interact. I think I'd be up for that. Why not? I say that safely, knowing nobody is going to ask me this. Well, we'll head across to Eastern Europe and join the thousands of people that are.
Oh no, we don't have to do that. I have a friend out there who runs games like this all the time. Yeah, when last time I saw her, she had just done or was just about to run a Redwall themed. Are you familiar with the Redwall novels? They're a series of like young adult novels. I read them when I was probably like 12, 13 years old, and they're all sort of, you know, tales of like they're all centered around an old abbey and like the people who work and live there and whatever warriors protect it, but all of the characters are like mice and hares and moles and things.
Never heard of that. I will give that a Google as soon as I hang up.
Yeah, I think you're probably a bit too old for those books now, but
probably, yeah. But hey, right, okay. I've kept you for quite a while, so I'm gonna pull up some of the questions without context that I've been
looking forward to this.
Oh, now I'm feeling that there's pressure on these questions without context. So let's see what we have.
But the nice thing is, there's no pressure on you.
That's true.
These people, they've given themselves enough rope to hang themselves with. It's all just you and me gonna bat their questions around for a little while.
Okay. Well, seeing as we've mentioned him a couple of times on the podcast already, I'm gonna use the questions.
If this question's from Rory, just put it right in the
Rory.
bin.
He hasn't sent in any.
All right.
I'm calling you out, Rory. I know you follow me on Twitter, and you've not sent any of these questions in. I'm a little bit upset, but there we go. That's staying in, not editing anything out. These are from Dante, who actually runs that Play D&D podcast that he's done Marvel and Gotham and different kind of. Well, I should have said Marvel and DC. He's done Marvel, and then he's done a DC one set in Gotham. That makes more sense. So he asks some interesting questions, such as, why is the internet so popular?
Oh, there's pictures of naked ladies on it.
That's a very simple answer, yeah, I think so. Or you can look up things like the Red Wall saga that you just mentioned. And
what is that now? Sorry, I was distracted by the thought of the... Never mind, moving on, yeah?
Well, sticking with maybe the idea of internet and also some of the dangerous things they might find on the internet, how old should a child be before they get their first smartphone?
Ooh. 12? No, I don't know. See, it's tough. You want to get them... I feel like you want... Once they're going out and doing things, like, with their friends, you want to be able to get in touch with them. You want to know where the heck they are. Because we all know what kids... Like, once you get to be, like, a tween... and you go to the mall or something, we know what those kids get up to.
So my son is 5 at the moment.
Probably too young.
He kind of has a tablet. So whenever we sort of upgraded I'd buy a new iPad and then pass my one down to my wife, and then her one went down to my son. So he's sort of got an iPad, but it's a bit different because that, only connects to the internet in the house. And we can, upload the apps like the different little kids apps, so he can watch some of the shows that he likes and play some kind of games where they learn the colours and the numbers and all things like that. So that's quite different from having a phone that is, with you wherever you are and constantly giving you access to. Also, it depends if you set up like your own account and they can download apps and buy things through your credit card. That's gonna.
That's a good point as well.
Cause you a fright when you get the bill. So we're putting it between 5 and 12, Dante.
Just say birth.
From birth. Just soon they will be born and like handed their smartphone as they leave the womb. That's basically it.
Yeah, because they're gonna, you're gonna want them to know how to use it.
Yeah.
What if they have to order a pizza?
Especially like that. I remember when I was growing up, having to go to the kitchen to make the tea and the coffee and carry up cups of scalding water to wake my parents up. Like, here's your coffee, here's your tea. And I suppose it's just the logical progression from there, isn't it? That, Dad, I've ordered you a pizza. Oh, thank you. That's
sure.
That's very kind of you, son. Well done. So as soon as they're fit to order pizzas, that's when they can have a phone. We've decided. This is a nice one. How are you?
Aging.
How old are you, can we ask?
Oh, my birthday just passed. I'm 34 years old.
Oh.
I have been for 5 whole days
Are
now.
you feeling it?
It's not much worse than 30. When I turned 30, it was like someone flipped a switch and everything started going wrong.
Yeah, I'm 31, so I know exactly what you mean.
It's just the warranty is up.
Yeah, and I keep, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, I keep hearing how much younger everyone is than me.
Oh, yeah. I was listening to, what was it? Mission to Zix, which if you like science fiction and comedy, it's a charming, it's really, really good. But the lead character on that, just today I was listening to it, and they're like, oh, yeah, I've been waiting for you for 40 years. He's like, well, so you got an 18-year head start on even my birth. And I was like, I'm listening to children. These people are a decade and change younger than I am, and they're doing something creative that they've made, and I'm making toys out of candy for people to poop out. Well,
I mean, yeah. I've got nothing to come back on that with. So I know at least you're getting to do that, because I feel like that's a level up for me. I wish I was making things out of candy for people to eat and then just get rid of however they like. But I'm really just talking into the void at this point. So that's,
I feel like we all are.
Got to be a metaphor in there somewhere. What is your favorite place on Earth? I think you sound like you're a very well-traveled man. So, and I like that he specified on Earth, because you could have easily gone with the moon or Mars. So he's keeping it, I say, local, at least to this planet.
Favorite place on Earth, huh? That's tough. I'm gonna vamp here while I actually think about it, because I know that I've been to a few really lovely places. The answer that springs most immediately to mind is my parents have a house on a lake in upstate New York that was 22 years ago was this dingy little shack on a nice little bit of land next to this small man-made lake up in the mountains. And about 10, 11 years ago, my dad tore it down and built this like big, beautiful log cabin style house there for my mom for their 25th wedding anniversary.
Wow, that's it's quite a gift.
Yeah, that place is lovely. Like to just go up there and, you know, have my family there or my friends and be able to look out and see, you know, the lake down at the end of the little walkway. And it's it always reminds me of in The Hobbit, they describe Rivendell as being the perfect place for whatever you wanted to do.
And you feel that applies to this spot on the lake. See, it's a very nice answer. Now, there is a part of me that feels like I might need to edit this out and just delete it, because if my wife hears what your dad did for your mum on their wedding anniversary, it's gonna come up every year. And
well, yeah, but my dad builds houses though, so
okay.
That's,
So like if I make her a podcast, it's fine. It's almost the same. All right,
yeah,
okay.
that would be
that's good.
Tear down an old podcast and then build her a new
I will do that. Okay.
Oh, wait, can I change the answer?
I mean, it makes my job editing it much easier.
There's a crab restaurant in Jersey City. That's yeah. Crab restaurant here in Jersey City. Favorite place on Earth.
Brilliant. Oh, now I feel really sad for your dad's hard work. All right. Well, seeing as you've moved to the animal theme, we'll ask one final question, which is an interesting question, I think. Should zoos be shut down?
Bad ones, yes.
Yeah. I think that's very apt when you were mentioning that you're a big fan of Jurassic Park, and then this question came out, and I was like, should zoos be shut down? Well, if Jurassic Park's taught us anything, there is an inherent danger in certain zoos, but
so I think the problem with many zoos is there are animals housed in them that simply shouldn't be there. Very few places are equipped to handle big cats, the big primates, any of like the really large African herbivores, rhinos and elephants and things. These are animals that have like really tremendous needs, either spatially or to sort of stimulate them intellectually. I don't think anyone should be housing whales or dolphins in captivity at all. I think that there just needs to be a little bit of responsibility and self-awareness on the parts of these organizations to make sure they're not housing animals that they're not equipped to. And it's a thorny issue because zoos do a lot of good in terms of like captive breeding programs and as outreach for people to learn about conservation. But those big animals can be real ambassadors for the rest of them. It's a draw, and a lot of the money that comes into zoos often goes into programs like that. But man, when you see a gorilla that's being kept in something that's the size of my apartment, a tiger in something that's not much bigger than like a suburban backyard, it's not right. These are animals with really serious both spatial and intellectual needs that are being kept in really unfair conditions.
Yeah, it's sort of one step removed from just getting them a sofa and a TV and saying, sit here and watch the other animals play. Right, well, I don't want to end on that question.
Yeah, what a bummer. Do we have one about like...
Well, no, I have my own question for you now, which is all of these questions were posed by Dante, who is a DM on his show. So what do you think? Do you reckon the mind of Dante means that he would be a good DM?
Oh, this is
based on these
we're
questions.
Tripping over into your other podcast kind
we
of territory.
Sort of are, yeah.
So what did he ask? What's your favorite place? Should zoos be shut down? How many fingers am I holding up? And what was the other one?
How old should a child be before they get their first smartphone?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's quite an array.
Yeah.
You know?
The ones I didn't ask you that are still on this same... Oh, also why the internet is so popular. That was another
Oh,
one.
right. But we figured that one out right out of the gate.
And there was also one about how do drills work? Will podcasts be the next big thing?
It's good varied stuff here. The most important thing about being a good DM, I think, is the same thing that comes from, that you need to be a good writer, which is a varied experience and knowledge of a lot of different things.
Which he is gaining that by asking my guests questions. So
he's just mining people for information.
He's got a strategy, which again I think is important if you're creating a story. So, well done, Dante.
Yeah.
We have decided.
Yeah, no, I would say Dante probably a good. I would play your game anytime.
All right, so expect a tweet from him as soon as this goes out, saying, "Ralph, when are you coming on?" Ralph, thank you very much for buying out some time from your, as we've heard, incredibly busy schedule, both work-wise and relaxation-wise, because it seems that even your things you do to unwind are quite time-consuming. But you brought out some time to talk to me, so I appreciate that.
It has been an absolute pleasure.
And if anyone listening has really enjoyed this conversation, they would like to hear more from you, where can they find you?
Let's see. Well, I'm on, of course, on Cake Boss. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CakeBossRalph. Be sure to look out for our new show, which is on Discovery Family in the United States. I don't know where you find it elsewhere, but it's called Bake It Like Buddy, which is a really, really charming little competition show, which I talked about earlier. I'm a judge on several episodes of that. It was a really good time. And, there might be more stuff coming up this winter.
Oh,
I'm not supposed to talk about.
Okay. And, we have a lot of listeners from, very important, influential places. So just don't even risk it, Ralph, because I wouldn't want your career to end because
maybe we
of
should
this.
just edit all that out.
I have a very strict, I hardly edit policy. So it's great for my free time, but it's really bad if you say something you don't want in there.
Yeah. Oh, and hey, listen, listener, if you enjoyed this show, why don't you tell a friend about it? Don't keep it a secret. It doesn't cost you anything. Help us out here.
That's true. I'm glad you said that, because otherwise I would have had to. And it sounds a little self-serving when I say it.
Yeah, but I could bully people a little bit, because this isn't my podcast. I'm just the guest. Who cares if they don't like me?
That's true. Do you want to just encourage them to go and listen to my other one as well?
Yeah, look, the guy's got 2 podcasts over here. He's busting his hump. He's busting 2 humps. He's like a Bactrian camel here, but like a busted one.
Right. And on that...
What were we talking about?
On that,
got real New York on that one.
You did, yeah. But again, keeping it all in. So, well, thank you again, Ralph. If you would like to go and listen to the other podcast, it's called Getting to Know Who. I'll put some links in the show notes. If you want to follow Ralph on Twitter, I'll also link that in the show notes as well. If you want to support this show or the other show, I've combined everything onto one Patreon. That is patreon.com/JasonPod.
Worked out really well for you that your last name is Pod.
It did.
And you do podcasting.
It's so convenient because growing up, got ridiculed at school because nobody knew what a podcast was.
Yeah, and Pod.
Yeah,
that's it's kind of it's a dopey sounding monosyllable.
Yeah, I mean, I'd blame my parents for
offense.
choosing it, but obviously it wasn't their fault. Although it was odd that they chose to change my name to Pod, and the rest of my family kept their original surname. But I assume it's because they knew great things were ahead of me in the podcasting world.
Eerily prescient of them.
Yeah. If only they'd invested.
They could have got in on the ground floor of big podcasting.
Exactly. Yeah. There were literally pounds to be made.
They could be thousandaires by this point.
I think I've said everything I normally say. I'm not used to being derailed in the outro. Got anything else that we're supposed to say, Ralph? You've listened to every episode of this show multiple times.
About that.
What else would I normally say?
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Well, he's got a new guest, time to put him to the test. So hey, what's the topic? We don't know, cause he never does research for this show. His name is Jason, he wants to talk to you about a topic you love or something you do. No two topics are ever the same. That might sound impressive, but they're all pretty lame. A conversation with